I never imagined that the deepest wound of my life would come from my own blood. See, pain. Pain I can handle. Life throws plenty of it your way: bills, loss, aging, broken dreams. But when it comes from your own child, it doesn't just sting. It hollows you out. There's a moment in life when you stop chasing things. You stop chasing money, approval, status. All you really want is to be part of the lives you helped create. To see your grandkids laugh, to share a quiet meal, to feel the warmth of family around a table. But sometimes, you're not given that seat at the table. Sometimes, they don't even set a place for you. I gave everything I had to my family. I raised my son with values, respect, sacrifice, and love. I didn't ask for perfection. Just honesty. Just a little space in his heart. A little recognition that I mattered. What I got in return was silence. Cold, deliberate silence. Until the day came when even my absence was erased. From a simple family photo. It might seem small to some. Just a picture. But let me tell you, there's nothing small about being erased. That photo told me everything I needed to know. And it marked the moment I realized, I had lost something I never thought I would. But I also remembered something that day, something I had quietly held on to for decades. And that's where this story truly begins. Long before any of this pain, before the photo, before the silence, I had a dream. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't ambitious in the way the world defines success. But it was mine. And it was rooted in the land. I grew up on that land. My father's hands turned its soil. My mother hung laundry between its old oak trees. That place wasn't just property, it was history. It was memory. It was home. When I inherited it, I didn't see dollar signs. I saw a future. I saw a place where my family could grow. A place where my children would run barefoot through the fields, climb the same trees I once climbed, fall asleep to the same sound of crickets I grew up with. And for a while, it felt like that dream might come true. I met the love of my life. We built a modest home. We weren't rich, but we had enough. Enough love. Enough laughter. Enough faith in the future to plant trees we might never sit under. When my son was born, I held him in the middle of that field. I looked at his tiny face and made a promise, not just to him, but to the land itself. One day, this will be yours. And you will know what it means. I spent years tending to that land, making it livable, safe, fertile. I repaired the fencing myself. I cleared rocks by hand. I watched over every inch of it as though it were sacred, because to me, it was. But dreams, I've learned, don't always stay in the hands of those who birth them. Over time, life shifted. My wife passed too soon. My son moved out, found work in the city, married. I understood. That's the way of life. Children must find their own way. But I always believed, always, that one day he would come back. That he'd understand what this place meant. That he'd raise his family here, not just out of convenience, but out of love. Eventually, I let him build his house on that land. I didn't charge him a cent. I signed the paperwork. Gave my blessing. I said, this is your home now. Raise your children here. Make your memories. And I thought. Maybe my dream had come full circle. I had no idea what was coming next. If you had asked me, years ago, who I was most proud of in this world, I wouldn't have hesitated. My son, I'd say. He's everything I wasn't. Smarter. More educated. More confident. And I meant it. Every word. I was the kind of father who clapped the loudest at his school plays, even when he only had one line. I waited outside football practices, rain or shine. I worked overtime shifts just so he could have a better backpack, a better future, a better chance. And for a long time, he made me proud. He was kind, thoughtful, even called me just to say hi. We had our differences, sure. He liked modern things, I was more old school. But that never got in the way. Not at first. It wasn't one big moment that broke us. It was slow. Subtle. A distance that crept in like a fog. Phone calls became less frequent. Visits, shorter. Sometimes they came without warning, like they were doing me a favor by stopping in. Holidays started to feel quiet. Like I was a guest in their schedule, not family. He still lived on my land. Still waved when he drove past. But something had changed. I started noticing things, a tone in his voice, like I was an obligation. His wife stopped calling me dad. The grandkids didn't know the stories of this place. They didn't know I'd planted the trees outside their window. They didn't even know my birthday. And every time I brought up the past, the memories, the sacrifices, he'd get uncomfortable. He'd change the subject. Act like it didn't matter. Like I was clinging to something outdated, something that didn't belong in their new life. I kept telling myself it was a phase. That he was busy. That families go through ups and downs. But deep inside, a quiet sadness was growing. The kind that settles in your bones. The kind that whispers late at night, "You're being forgotten." And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling. The boy I had raised with love was slowly erasing me from the very story I helped build. It was a Saturday. I remember because the sun was out, and I had just finished trimming the hedges near the old gate. The kind of quiet afternoon that makes you stop and breathe, just for a second. That's when I saw the cars. SUVs, sedans, even a rental van, all pulling into the driveway that led to my son's house, the one that sat just a few hundred yards from mine. The house that stood on my land. At first, I thought maybe it was a birthday party. Or a church gathering. But I hadn't heard a word about it. No mention of plans, no calls, no quick stop by the house to say, "Hey, Dad, come join us." Still, I walked up toward the fence line. I stayed back, not wanting to intrude. I figured someone would see me and wave me over. That's what family does. But no one did. I stood there and watched them laugh. Saw my grandchildren running around in matching outfits. My daughter-in-law was setting up decorations, balloons, flowers, a banner I couldn't quite read from where I was. And my son. He was in the center of it all, smiling wide, greeting guests, holding his youngest in his arms. Still, I waited. I told myself, they're just getting settled. Someone will come. But they never did. Minutes turned into nearly an hour. The photographer arrived, a young woman with a large camera and a clipboard. She started directing people, grandparents here, siblings there, children in the front. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just a party. It was a family photo shoot. A formal one. Planned. Coordinated. Paid for. Everyone was dressed in the same soft tones, standing in front of the big oak tree I had planted the year my son was born. And I wasn't in it. No one looked for me. No one waved me in. I wasn't even a thought. I watched them pose beneath that tree, my tree. I watched them laugh and embrace and smile as if their family was whole. And I wasn't part of it. I didn't cry right away. I didn't shout. I just stood there, like a ghost. Like a stranger trespassing on his own land. And then, I turned around. And walked back home, slower than I ever had before. That walk, those few hundred yards, felt like miles. And with every step, something inside me hardened. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept telling myself maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they'd come by later. Maybe they'd realized I wasn't there and felt awful about it. Maybe. But no one came. The next morning, I made a cup of coffee and sat at the old kitchen table, the one with scratches from years of homework, spilled milk, and Sunday breakfasts. I turned on my phone, more out of habit than curiosity. And there it was. The first photo. It popped up on my feed because my niece had liked it. A beautifully edited picture of my son's family, smiling, arms around each other, perfectly framed beneath that old oak tree. The caption read, "So blessed to have our whole family together today. Memories we'll cherish forever. Whole family." I stared at that line for a long time. Not in anger. Not even shock. Just heartbreak. Because there it was, proof that it hadn't been an oversight. It wasn't a misunderstanding. They had planned it. Chosen their outfits. Smiled for the camera. And posted it proudly for the world to see. Without me. I kept scrolling. More photos. Group shots. Siblings. Grandparents. Cousins. All smiling. All celebrating. Without even a mention of the man who gave them the ground they were standing on. One picture showed the kids holding a framed sign. Family is everything. I put the phone down. I didn't throw it. I didn't scream. I just sat there. And felt something deep inside me go quiet. Not dead. Not angry. Just quiet. That kind of silence that only comes when something inside you breaks, not all at once, but piece by piece. And in that silence, something else began to grow. Not revenge. Not rage. Clarity. A realization that while they had chosen to forget me, I still had the one thing they'd all taken for granted. The land. The days after the photo passed slowly, quiet, heavy. No calls. No messages. No one knocked on my door to ask why I wasn't there. No one even seemed to notice I hadn't been. And that silence? It wasn't just from them. It came from within me, too. I stopped tending the garden. Didn't bother fixing the loose gate hinge I had meant to get to. I sat in my old chair by the window and watched the wind move through the trees like time itself, gentle, relentless, uncaring. I cried, but not the loud, messy kind. Mine came like a quiet leak in the heart. You feel it every morning when you wake up and every night when you try to sleep. And during those still, lonely hours, one question echoed over and over in my mind. Where did I go wrong? I thought back to my choices. Was I too strict when he was a boy? Did I hold on too tightly? Not tightly enough? Did I expect too much? Or maybe not enough? I remembered his teenage years. The time he skipped school and I grounded him for a week. The time I hugged him after his first heartbreak and said, "You'll be stronger for it." The day I gave him the keys to that old truck and watched him drive away for college. I was never perfect, but I loved him with everything I had. And yet, somehow, I ended up here. Not hated. Not harmed. Just invisible. It's a strange kind of grief, grieving someone who's still alive. Someone who lives right down the road but walks past you like a stranger. Someone who builds a life using your foundation, and then pretends you were never part of it. I began to realize that this wasn't just about the photo. The photo was the symptom. The real wound ran deeper. I had been replaced, not by another man, but by convenience. By a version of life where I was no longer needed. No longer respected. No longer loved. And in that realization, I felt something shift. Not out of bitterness, but out of the quiet understanding that sometimes you have to stop waiting to be remembered, and start remembering who you are. That land. It wasn't just dirt and grass to me. It was my life's work. My anchor. The one thing that stayed steady through all the storms. I remember clearing that land with my bare hands. Back when I was young and stubborn, with more willpower than money. I remember the blisters, the sunburn, the cold nights I spent in a tent before the house even had a roof. Every fence post was hammered in by me. Every rock I moved, every trench I dug, every corner of that property, I knew it by heart. It was where I buried my dog under the apple tree. Where I built the swing set when my boy turned 5. Where my wife and I slow danced barefoot in the yard one evening, just because we felt like it. That land held our joys. Our fights. Our reconciliations. It absorbed our laughter and our pain. It held us. So when the time came, and my son asked if he could build his home there, it wasn't even a question. I didn't consult lawyers. I didn't ask for rent. I didn't hesitate. I gave him that land the way you give a piece of your heart, freely, without condition. Because I thought that's what fathers did. We build so our children don't have to start from nothing. I thought I was giving him a future. I thought he would understand the value of it, not just in money, but in memory. In roots. In us. But over time, I saw that the land had become something else. A convenience. A canvas for his life, with my part of the story scrubbed clean. My sacrifices turned invisible. My presence unwelcome. They built a beautiful house on that land. Granite countertops. An open floor plan. Big windows looking out over the hills I once cleared with nothing but a shovel and sweat. And yet, despite everything that house stood on, it might as well have been built on someone else's soil. That's how far they had drifted from me. But I hadn't drifted. I was still there. Still watching the seasons change, the same way I always had. Still waking up before dawn, still remembering every inch of what that land had cost me. And one morning, sitting at that kitchen table, looking out over the fields, I realized something. They had taken the land for granted. But I still held the deed. I didn't make the decision in anger. There were no slammed doors. No shouted threats. No dramatic confrontations. It was early morning, just before the sun peeked over the trees. I was sitting at my desk with the original documents in front of me. The deed. The agreement I had signed years ago, giving my son permission to build his house on a piece of the land. Not ownership. Just permission. At the time, I didn't think it mattered. We were family. There was trust. Love. What could possibly go wrong? But now, looking at those pages, I saw them differently. They weren't just papers. They were proof that, legally, that land was still mine. And so, I made a decision. Quietly. Respectfully. But firmly. I contacted a lawyer I knew, an old friend from church. Explained the situation. I asked him one question. Can I revoke the use of the land if it's still in my name? He looked over the papers and nodded slowly. Yes, he said. You can. It was like hearing the final click of a lock turning. Not out of revenge, but out of clarity. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I wasn't trying to destroy lives or tear down memories. But I also couldn't allow myself to be erased. On my own soil. So, Over the next few weeks, I filed the necessary paperwork. No fanfare. No announcements. Just quiet steps toward reclaiming what I had once given away in good faith. I didn't tell them right away. I let the papers speak for me when they arrived. A formal letter. A notice of land use revocation. A respectful window of time to make arrangements. No threats. Just facts. I knew it would shake their world. But they had already shaken mine. They took my presence for granted. My love. My silence. My roots. But I hadn't disappeared. And now, they would remember that. Not through words. Not through arguments. But through the ground beneath their feet. It didn't take long. 3 days after the letter arrived, I heard the sound of tires screeching up the graveled driveway. My son stormed out of his truck before the engine even shut off. His face, red, clenched, confused. He didn't knock. He walked right in, like he used to when he was a boy. Only this time, he wasn't here for a hug or a warm meal. He slammed the letter on the table and shouted. "What the hell is this, Dad?" I looked at him calmly, my hands folded in front of me. "It's what it says," I replied. "I'm taking back the land." He laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh I remembered. It was bitter, disbelieving, laced with betrayal. "You can't do this. We built our lives here. The kids, this is their home." I nodded slowly. "I know. I watched you build it. I let you build it. I even dreamed of it. Once." His wife came later that afternoon. She didn't yell. She cried. She called me heartless, said I was tearing a family apart. Said I'd ruin my grandchildren's childhood if I went through with it. And all I could think was, did no one think of that when they left me out of theirs? Suddenly, I wasn't their father. I wasn't their elder. I wasn't the man who gave them the land, or the roof over their heads. I was the enemy. The next few days were chaos. Phone calls. Emails. Even a cousin tried to mediate, asking me to be the bigger person. But where were all these voices when I was sitting alone by my window? Where was their concern when I stood in silence, watching that family photo being taken without me? It hurt, to see them hurt. Of course it did. I'm not made of stone. But I also knew something deeper now. I had been carrying the weight of this family alone for too long. And maybe it was time they felt just a fraction of what I had felt. Not to punish them, but to wake them up. After the dust settled, the silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful this time. It was heavy. I found myself staring out the same window, only now I wasn't wondering why they forgot me, I was wondering what I had become. Was I standing up for myself? Or simply trying to hurt them the way they hurt me? That question haunted me. Justice and vengeance, they wear the same clothes sometimes. Both feel powerful. Both feel like finally. But one is rooted in dignity. The other, in destruction. And the truth is, I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel like a man who had taught a lesson. I felt like a man who had drawn a line in the sand. And wasn't sure anymore which side of it he truly belonged on. I remembered holding my son in the field the day he was born. The way his fingers wrapped around mine. The way I whispered, "You're safe now. I'll always protect you." Had I broken that promise? I thought about my grandkids, too. Their innocent faces. The laughter I heard through open windows. Did they know I wasn't invited to that photo? Did they know how much that silence cost? Probably not. They were just living their lives in a home they didn't know was built on pain. And so I asked myself, again and again. Was I reclaiming my worth, or just passing my pain forward? It's easy to justify actions when you've been hurt. Easy to say, they deserve this. But the older I get, the more I realize. The hardest part of being a father is doing what's right, even when it breaks your heart. I wasn't sure anymore what was right. But I knew one thing for certain. This choice, this quiet act of reclaiming, was no longer about land. It was about being seen. Word spread, as it always does in small towns. At the diner, I could feel the glances. Some pitied me. Some judged me. Others just didn't know what to say. One man pulled me aside at the gas station, an old friend, a neighbor I'd shared tools and stories with for years. "Hell of a move," he said. There was no accusation in his voice. No praise either. Just truth. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to speak in silence. Others weren't so kind. A woman from church approached me after service, frowning. "You're going to uproot children? Over a picture?" And I wanted to ask her. Would you still call it just a picture if it was your face missing? If your name was left out of your own family's story? But I didn't. Because the truth is, no one really sees the years you spent pouring yourself into a family. They only see your breaking point. They don't see the empty chairs at holidays. They don't see the missed phone calls, the cancelled plans, the ache of being a ghost in the very life you helped build. No, they just see now. And now looked like an old man kicking his family out of their home. But there were others, quiet voices, kind ones, who stopped by in the evenings. Men who had grown children too. Women who knew what it was to be forgotten by the very people they gave everything to. One of them, a widow named Marlene, brought me a pie and said something I'll never forget. Sometimes love means letting go. But sometimes it means standing still and saying, no more. And in that moment, I didn't feel cruel. I felt seen. With all the noise gone, after the phone calls stopped, the visits ended, the arguing faded, I found myself surrounded by something unfamiliar. Stillness. Not the kind that's lonely. The kind that's empty in the best way, like a field after the harvest. Quiet, yes. But full of history. Full of meaning. And in that stillness, I started to rediscover someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Me. I walked the land again, not to check boundaries or count losses, but to remember. To feel it under my feet the way I once did as a young man, when everything was in front of me. I ran my hand along the old barn door. I watched the deer graze at dusk. I sat by the tree I'd planted when my wife passed, and let myself cry, not for what I'd lost, but for how long I'd held it all in. And slowly, something unexpected returned, peace. Not the kind that comes from getting even. The kind that comes from finally telling the truth, to yourself. The truth that I had value. That my story mattered. That I was not just dad or grandpa or the guy who gave us the land. I was a man with a history, a heart, and a voice. And I had spent years letting that voice go quiet in the name of family. I thought love meant sacrifice. And it does. But it also means being honored. And maybe, just maybe, I had forgotten to teach them that by never demanding it for myself. So I started doing little things. I painted the porch again. I cleaned out the shed. I fixed the gate hinge I'd ignored. Not for anyone else. Not in hopes they'd come back. But because I was still here. And I was worth the care. Legacy. It's a word people throw around like it's a plaque on a wall, or a name in a will. But to me, it's always been something quieter. Legacy is the story they tell about you when you're gone. It's the fingerprints you leave on hearts, not just handrails and land deeds. For the longest time, I thought my legacy would be the land. The fields. The house. The roots I planted so deep, no storm could tear them up. But now, I see things differently. Legacy isn't just about what you give. It's about what you stand for. I gave my son the land so he could build a future. But I never taught him to honor the past. I never taught him that love isn't just convenience, it's presence. It's memory. It's showing up. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe I let silence speak for me too long. But it's not too late to shape the ending. Because I still have time. Not to punish. Not to shame. But to live honestly, and show what strength looks like when it's not loud, but steady. Maybe my grandkids will ask one day, why did Grandpa live alone? Why did he take the land back? And I hope someone will say, because he gave everything. And when no one saw him anymore, he chose to see himself. That's the legacy I want. Not bitterness. Not control. But truth. A quiet kind of love that says, I mattered. I stood tall. I didn't disappear. Love doesn't always look like we imagined it would. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's one-sided. But even when it hurts, even when it leaves you out of the picture, it still lingers. It still teaches. It still matters. I don't hate my son. I don't hate his family. I don't even hate what they did. I mourn it. Because deep down, I still love them. I always will. But love doesn't mean letting yourself be erased. Love means telling the truth, even when it's hard. Even when it costs you everything. I took back the land not to destroy what they built, but to remind them, and maybe remind myself, that I was there. That I mattered. That you don't get to rewrite the story and leave out the chapters that raised you. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt forgotten, invisible, left out of the photo, you're not alone. You're not petty. You're not weak. You're human. And you deserve to be seen. If this story moved you, please don't leave without letting us know. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been left out of your own family's story? Give this video a thumbs up so more people can find it. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the stories that need to be told. Thank you for being here. For listening. For remembering that sometimes, the quietest voices have the most to say.